The sun had not yet burned away the morning chill when the sound began. Eleanor Vance had lived on the edge of the Greater Maasai Conservancy for 12 years, and she thought she knew every single sound the African bush could make. She knew the saw-like rasp of the leopard in the twilight, the rhythmic bark of the baboons signaling danger, the deep, rumbling greetings of the adult lions, the very monarchs of her world. But this sound, this tiny, insistent noise that started promptly at 5 o'clock every morning, was new. It was a soft, scraping pat, like a small branch being gently tapped against the wooden frame of her back door. It was a knock. Eleanor's remote cabin was built from heavy timber and corrugated iron, designed to withstand the extremes of the climate and the occasional curious elephant. She was a solitary woman, dedicated to cataloging and protecting the endangered wildlife that roamed the vast, unfenced territory surrounding her. Her life was defined by routine, the three-a-milling of her camera traps, the precise rationing of water, and the quiet dignity of sunrise. The idea that someone or something was waiting at her door in the pre-dawn darkness was unsettling. The first time it happened, she dismissed it as a wind chime she didn't know she owned, or perhaps a large insect battering itself against the glass. But the next morning, the same pattern. A light, almost hesitant tap, 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 followed by silence. And then, a few minutes later, another gentle series of knocks. It was too regular, too intentional to be random. On the third morning, Eleanor woke before the alarm. The air was heavy with the scent of dew and distant wood smoke. At 4:58 a.m., she was already standing silently by the door, her hand resting on the smooth, cool wood. The knocking came exactly on schedule. Tap, tap, tap. It lasted only 3 seconds, then stopped. It was close to the ground, lower than a baboon, softer than a jackal. She took a deep, steadying breath, slipped the bolt, and slowly, cautiously pulled the heavy door inward just a crack. What she saw was not a threat, but a disaster. Crouching on the dusty stoop, shivering in the damp air, was a creature so small it seemed impossible it could survive in this land of giants. It was a lion cub. But this was no robust, playful member of a pride. This cub was frail, barely larger than a house cat, and so gaunt that its ribs showed starkly beneath a coat of dull, colorless fur. Its huge, frightened eyes were the color of molten honey, and they stared up at her with a desperate, pleading look that went straight through her. The cub wasn't actually knocking. He was using his tiny, oversized paws to paw at the doorframe, a movement that likely mimicked the feeling of seeking comfort from his mother or siblings. It was a reflex of utter helplessness. He was completely alone. Eleanor, a woman who had witnessed both the incredible beauty and the unforgiving brutality of nature, felt her professional resolve crumble instantly. Conservation rules were absolute. Never interfere, never habituate, let nature take its course. But looking down at this pathetic scrap of life, barely 5 or 6 weeks old, she saw only one course left for him, and it ended violently under the sun. She had no choice. She opened the door wider, speaking in a low, soothing voice. "Hello there, little one," she whispered. "Where is your mother?" The cub didn't run. He only swayed slightly, taking a tentative, wobbly step toward the warmth and the light, then collapsing. With a practiced movement, Eleanor scooped him up. He weighed almost nothing, shockingly light for a predator. Inside, the cub was instantly placed onto a soft blanket in front of a small, humming space heater. His body temperature was dangerously low. Eleanor, wasting no time, set about stabilizing him. She had a basic vet kit and supplies for injured wildlife. She mixed up a special electrolyte solution, warming it carefully, and offered it through a dropper. The cub, who she immediately started calling Leo, was too weak to even suckle properly. The hours that followed were a blur of meticulous care. Tiny sips of liquid, a physical examination that revealed no obvious injury but confirmed extreme malnutrition and dehydration, and the constant fear that he would simply stop breathing. The first 24 hours were the most critical. If he made it through the night, he might have a chance. She found herself talking to him constantly, telling him about the sun and the sky and the great river nearby, willing him to fight. She knew she was crossing a boundary. A lion cub that survives human care becomes a complex, dangerous dilemma, but right now, all that mattered was the breath in his tiny chest. As the morning stretched on, Eleanor searched the immediate area around her cabin. She checked her camera trap footage from the past 3 days. Nothing. No lionesses, no tracks of a pride, no sign of a struggle. It was as if Leo had simply materialized out of the vast, empty bush, or had been abandoned far away and walked until he could walk no more. The absence of a mother was profoundly worrying. Lionesses are fiercely protective. They don't simply misplace a cub. For him to be completely alone meant something terrible had happened. That evening, as the moon rose huge and golden over the horizon, Leo finally took a full, deep breath and let out a sound. It wasn't a roar or even a knock. It was a tiny, high-pitched mew, a sound of complaint, hunger, and perhaps relief. It was the moment Eleanor knew she was invested. This wasn't just a rescue, it was a commitment. Eleanor prepared a specialized formula from powdered milk replacement and vitamins, offering it in a bottle. This time, Leo latched on weakly but consistently. Watching him drink, the first sign of innate instinctive will to live, was profoundly moving. We are so glad you are following this journey with Eleanor and Leo. If this story has already touched your heart and you want to see how this dramatic rescue unfolds, please take a moment right now to hit that subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up. Your support helps us tell more vital stories about the animals who need our voices most. Back in the cabin, the simple act of feeding was exhausting for both of them. After his initial feeding, Leo slept for 4 hours straight, curled up near the heat, completely trusting the woman who had saved him. That trust, Eleanor realized, was the most heartbreaking part. He saw her as a replacement for the comfort and safety he had lost. But the mystery of his abandonment continued to haunt her. Why was a cub this young, this small, wandering alone? Why did he knock specifically at 5 in the morning right before dawn? She spent the late hours reviewing wildlife journals, trying to piece together a theory. The 5 a.m. timing was strange. It's a transition time in the savannah, the time when nocturnal predators return to their dens and diurnal animals begin to stir. It is a critical, dangerous window. Was he following a forgotten memory? Was 5 a.m. the time his mother used to leave the den to hunt? Eleanor knew that once Leo recovered his strength, she would have to face the real danger. The moment he could walk confidently, he would be a beacon for every hyena, jackal, and jealous male lion in the territory. She had shielded him from the immediate elements, but the true threat was out there, circling in the dark, and she was rapidly running out of time to find the answers she needed. She looked down at the tiny, vulnerable face, now twitching slightly in his sleep. The reason he kept knocking at her door had to be a deep, instinctual search for salvation. But the story behind his desperate journey, the reason his heart was broken, was still hidden out in the wild. And Eleanor knew she had to venture out and find it. This was only the beginning of their shared, perilous path. She made a silent promise to the sleeping cub. She would protect him, no matter what it cost her. This realization settled deep in her soul, a heavy yet comforting weight. The cold facts of his abandonment, the silent tragedy of his missing pride, weighed heavily on her conscience. She visualized the vast, empty landscape just outside her door, a place of impossible beauty and unimaginable cruelty. How long had he been out there? How many sunrises had he faced alone? The thought made her throat tighten. She gently stroked his frail head, the coarse fur surprisingly soft beneath her fingers. The journey ahead was daunting, filled with legal hurdles and biological impossibilities, but for now, there was just the gentle rise and fall of his small chest, a rhythm of hope in the wild heart of Africa. The sound of the wind picking up outside was a constant reminder of the fierce world they were up against, a world that Eleanor knew intimately and respected absolutely. Yet for this one creature, she was willing to challenge every rule of that world. The 5 a.m. knock had not only saved Leo's life, it had fundamentally changed Eleanor's. Leo had spent 3 days fighting for his life, and Eleanor had spent 3 days fighting alongside him. The tiny spark of life she had found on her doorstep was finally glowing brighter. With meticulous, round-the-clock care, the cub had transitioned from barely moving to taking wobbly, exploratory steps around the cabin's small living area. His dull fur was beginning to regain its golden hue, and the desperate, empty look in his eyes was slowly being replaced by a cautious curiosity. The bond that formed between them was immediate and primal. Leo treated Eleanor not just as a provider of milk and warmth, but as his new center of gravity. When she moved, he followed, stumbling over his 2 large paws. When she sat down to record data in her journal, he would instantly curl up on her lap, a purring vibration that felt more like a distant, rumbling engine than the soft sound of a cat. For Eleanor, a woman who had deliberately chosen a life of scientific detachment from her subjects, this constant, warm presence was both a joy and a profound complication. The clock was ticking. In 2 weeks, Leo would be strong enough to truly explore, and his instinctual calls and scent would attract danger. Eleanor needed to act fast. She needed to understand the mystery of the 5 a.m. knock and the even greater mystery of his missing pride. The logical first step was to contact her colleagues at the Conservancy, specifically her longtime friend and ranger, David Mwandu, who managed the nearest monitoring outpost. David, a man of quiet integrity and deep knowledge of the bush, arrived the next afternoon. Eleanor showed him the cub, now asleep and looking almost normal. David's reaction was a mixture of professional alarm and genuine concern. He knew the strict rules, but seeing the skeletal remnant of a lion cub that Eleanor had saved, he understood her choice. "Eleanor," he said softly, "you know what this means. If we keep him, he can never truly be wild again. And if we try to reintroduce him, he must first learn to be a lion." "I know, David," she replied, her voice thick, "but the pride. Where is the Amani's pride? I haven't seen them on the ridge in days, and they never leave a cub." The Amani pride was well known to the Conservancy, a small group of 6 that had successfully held territory near Eleanor's cabin for 5 seasons. They were strong, healthy, and their movements were usually predictable. David agreed to lead an immediate, intensive search. Eleanor, unable to risk exposing Leo yet, stayed behind, entrusting David with the location of the last confirmed sightings. While David was gone, Eleanor made the cabin safe. She reinforced the low windows and covered every tempting electrical cord. She worked tirelessly, but every time she paused, the mystery of the 5 a.m. knock returned. She reviewed the camera trap footage again, focusing on the hours between 4 a.m. and 6 a.m. for the week before she found Leo. Still nothing. The bush was empty. It felt as though a great silence had fallen over the land. 2 days later, David returned. He didn't come to the cabin immediately. He waited by the Land Rover, his face grim, and asked Eleanor to meet him outside. "We found them, Eleanor," he said, his voice flat. "Or what's left of them." He described a scene of devastation in a remote, rocky valley 10 miles away. It was the site of a brutal, sudden conflict, but not with rangers or poachers. It was a territorial battle. A coalition of 3 nomadic male lions, known for their aggressive expansion into new areas, had swept through. They were infamous for killing the cubs of rival males to establish their own lineage with the lionesses. "The males," David explained. "They are gone. 2 lionesses fled, severely injured. And the mother, Leo's mother, she was found there." Eleanor listened, tears welling up not for the tragedy of the natural world, which she understood, but for the silent heartbreak of the small cub purring inside her cabin. David handed her something wrapped in a piece of cloth, a small, crudely carved wooden toy, painted with bright yellow and blue ochre, a small elephant shape. The mother's name was Shani. The pride had been near a small village last month. Shani had a distinctive habit of bringing things back to her cubs, small, harmless things from the edges of the human world. Trinkets. We found this beside her. The revelation was overwhelming. Shani, Leo's mother, hadn't abandoned him. She had died defending him. But why was Leo not with her? Why did he walk 10 miles in the opposite direction toward a lone human cabin? And why did he knock at 5 a.m.? David offered the key piece of information. "The fight, Eleanor. It happened at 4:30 a.m. We estimate the attack was swift. The lionesses, they knew what was coming. They knew the males target the cubs first." Eleanor froze, the timeline snapping into painful focus. "The knocking, the time of the attack." David nodded slowly. Shani was known to wake the cubs exactly at 5 a.m. every morning when she was near their den, right at that transition time, not to hunt, but to move them. She was exceptionally cautious, always moving them to new cover just before the dawn light made them visible to circling eagles or early travelers. She would nudge them awake with her paw, one by one. She would use the same movement, the same rhythmic tap, tap, tap to get their attention. The heartbreak was devastatingly clear. Leo wasn't knocking on Eleanor's door. He was responding to the deepest, most desperate memory of his mother's safety cue. At 5 a.m., the time his mother always woke him to move him to safety, his survival instinct had driven him to perform the only ritual of safety he knew. He was pawing at the door, hoping to feel the familiar fur of his mother's flank, waiting for her to signal the movement. The reason he kept knocking was that his tiny, traumatized mind was still following Shani's last, best lesson. When the tapping starts, safety is near. This emotional story is far from over, and the danger for Leo is only growing. Before we continue this incredible, heart-wrenching journey to find a solution for Leo, please take a moment to join our community. If you haven't already, please subscribe to the channel and share this video with someone who loves animals as much as you do. Let's make sure Leo's story reaches everyone. Eleanor placed the small wooden elephant toy beside the sleeping cub. She realized Leo must have been separated from his mother just moments before the final attack. Perhaps Shani had given him the signal, sent him away in the fog, sacrificing herself so he could run while she faced the larger threat. Leo had run, and when the instinct to seek cover activated at 5 a.m., he followed the sound of his mother's rhythmic tap, only to find the unyielding wood of Eleanor's door. His 5 a.m. visitor status was not a coincidence, but a silent testament to a lioness's final act of courage. Now, with the mystery solved, the real challenge began. Leo was recovering, but he was rapidly growing out of the cute cub stage and into a formidable predator. He needed to be integrated into a secure, protected environment, far away from the dangers of the territory he had inherited through tragedy. Eleanor knew she couldn't keep him, but she also knew she could not, under any circumstance, release him to the same fate that had claimed his mother. The conservation community would demand one thing, and her heart, now irrevocably attached to the little orphan, demanded another. She had to find a compromise, a place where he could grow up safe, but still feel the sun on his fur and the earth beneath his paws. The weight of this responsibility settled heavily on her. Leo, the little cub who knocked at 5 a.m., was about to launch Eleanor on the most difficult mission of her career. The journey to his forever home was just beginning. The decision, when it came, would be the hardest she had ever made. Leo's rapid recovery was a testament to Eleanor's unwavering care, but with strength came size, and with size came the complex truth of who he was. He was no longer a frail, helpless kitten. He was a lion cub, capable of instinctual play that bordered on fierce hunting behavior. He would stalk Eleanor's shadow, pounce on her boots, and demand his milk with a growl that was still small but undeniably a roar in the making. The cabin, once a safe haven, was quickly becoming a cage, and the proximity to humans was cementing a reliance that would ruin any chance of a wild life. Eleanor understood the brutal reality. She had saved Leo's life, but now she had to save his future. David Mondu, her trusted colleague, returned 2 days later with a plan. "I contacted the Killian Wildlife Sanctuary," David announced. "It's a specialized center, 300 miles north. They have a non-releasable female lion, about 5 years old, named Zara. She lost her own litter to illness last year. They have the space, the veterinary care, and Zara has the capacity to accept an orphaned cub. She could teach him to be a lion again." The plan was audacious, risky, and the only viable path. Integrating an orphaned cub into a new pride, even a managed one, was fraught with danger. But giving Leo a foster mother, a sense of belonging, and the vast open space of a protected sanctuary, it was the closest thing to the wild home he had lost. The emotional weight of the decision crushed Eleanor. She had spent every hour of the last 2 weeks as Leo's mother, his protector, his comfort. The idea of handing him over, even for his own good, felt like a betrayal of Shani's final sacrifice. She looked at the small cub, nestled asleep on her worn armchair, the little wooden elephant toy resting nearby. He was hers now, in every way that mattered to her heart. But the vast savannah called, and she knew she had to listen for him. "When do we leave?" she asked David, her voice barely a whisper. "Tomorrow morning," David replied gently. "At 5 a.m., before the heat, before anyone is watching. It is safer that way." The timing struck Eleanor like a physical blow. The moment of Leo's greatest trauma, the time of the rhythmic knock, was now set to be the hour of their separation. It was poetic, heartbreaking, and perhaps a final act of respect for Shani. They would use the time of his mother's final safety cue to deliver him to his new permanent safety. The farewell was swift and agonizing. Eleanor bathed Leo one last time, dried him with a soft towel, and offered him a final bottle of milk. She spoke to him in hushed tones, telling him the story of his brave mother, Shani, and promising him that he would be loved, protected, and that he would finally get to feel the earth, not the floorboards beneath his paws. Leo, sensing the change in her mood, was restless, nuzzling into her neck and letting out small, uncertain mews. At 4:45 a.m., Eleanor carried him, wrapped tightly in the same blanket she had first placed him on, to David's Land Rover. The air was cold, damp, and perfectly silent. As she placed him gently into the secured transport crate, Leo woke up fully. He turned his head and looked directly at Eleanor, his honey eyes wide with confusion and a flicker of the old desperation. Then he raised his tiny, oversized paw and tapped it lightly against the mesh of the crate. Tap, 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 exactly 3 times. It was his final, instinctive knock. He was asking if this was the new safe place, confirming the ritual one last time. Eleanor reached through the mesh, touching his velvet nose. "Yes, my beautiful boy," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "This is the safe place. This is where you become a king." The drive to the Killian Sanctuary was long, winding through miles of acacia scrub and rolling grassland. When they finally arrived, they were greeted by the sanctuary director, a kind woman named Sarah, who had prepared a large, secure boma enclosure for the transfer. The crucial moment came during the introduction to Zara. The magnificent lioness, massive and scarred from her life in the wild before her rescue, watched from a distance as Leo was released into the boma. He was tiny against her powerful form, and Eleanor held her breath, fearing the natural rejection or worse, aggression. Leo, however, didn't hesitate. He was exhausted, traumatized, and driven by the deep instinctual need for a pride. He stumbled directly toward Zara, letting out a series of frantic baby mews. Zara lowered her massive head, sniffing him cautiously. She let out a low, guttural rumble that Eleanor had never heard Leo make, a sound of profound lion communication. Then she did the unbelievable. She nudged him. Not with aggression, but with a firm, maternal nudge, much like a mother waking her cub. Leo, the tiny orphan, instantly recognized the comfort of a lioness's touch. He pushed himself against her flank and began to suckle the dry fur, letting out a deep, relaxed purr. Zara, accepting him completely, curled her huge body around the tiny, fragile lion cub, shielding him from the world. In that moment, Leo found his missing mother's embrace, the one thing his heart had been desperately knocking for. Eleanor watched from the viewing platform, standing beside David. She finally allowed herself to breathe. The knock had been answered. Leo grew up fast under Zara's protection, thriving in the enormous enclosure that mimicked the true savannah. He learned to stalk, to play rough, and to communicate like a lion. Eleanor, now a frequent visitor, would watch him from a distance, never approaching the enclosure, ensuring he bonded only with Zara and the other big cats. The tiny, scared cub who knocked at 5 a.m. became a strong, handsome young lion, known for his curious gaze and powerful presence. The story of Leo is a powerful reminder that even in the face of brutal, natural tragedy, the instinct for life, guided by a mother's final lesson of safety, can prevail. Eleanor saved his life with an act of humanity, but Shani, the brave mother, saved his soul with a rhythmic tap. That silent, desperate knock on a lonely door brought two worlds together and ensured that a piece of the wild heart of Africa lives on, safe and strong, fulfilling the ultimate promise of his survival.